There are civilizations remembered for their noise, for their wars, their rulers, their monuments. Ancient Egypt is remembered differently. Even now, when we think of Egypt, we imagine silence. Long shadows across stone, the slow movement of the Nile at night, temples resting under stars that do not hurry. This sense of quiet is not accidental. Ancient Egypt was not a civilization obsessed with explanation. It did not rush to define every mystery. Instead, it learned to live beside them. This video is not about uncovering secrets. It is about listening to them. In Egypt, many of life's most important moments happened in stillness, at night, when the heat retreated, when voices lowered, when the world became less demanding. Darkness was not feared. It was expected. Night did not interrupt life. It completed it. Along the Nile, the day ended gradually. There was no sharp boundary between activity and rest. Work softened as light faded. The body followed without resistance. This rhythm shaped everything. Sleep was not treated as an absence. It was a state of transition. Dreams were not dismissed as imagination. They were taken seriously, sometimes more seriously than waking thoughts. Death itself was not understood as an ending. It was a continuation, entered quietly. This is why Egypt still feels mysterious, not because its knowledge was hidden, but because its relationship with time, rest, and silence was different. In this video, we will not move quickly. We will not list facts. We will not search for conclusions. Instead, we will pass through the night as it was once experienced. We will walk along the Nile after sunset. We will pause inside homes lit by small oil lamps. We will stand quietly near temples during their silent hours. We will listen to how sleep, dreams, and ritual shaped daily life, how death was prepared for without fear, and how mystery was allowed to remain unresolved. Nothing in this story needs urgency. There is no moment to reach, no answer that must arrive. Ancient Egypt understood something simple and rare: that not everything meaningful needs to be explained. Some things need to be approached slowly, at night, when the world is quiet enough to listen. Let the pace soften. The night in ancient Egypt is beginning. In ancient Egypt, night did not arrive suddenly. It unfolded. The most noticeable change was not the dark, but the release. The land exhaled as the heat loosened its grip. Stone cooled. Sand softened. The air, heavy through the day, began to move again. This transition mattered deeply. Daytime along the Nile demanded endurance. The sun governed labor, pace, and attention. Bodies adapted by working within its limits, not against them. But when evening approached, effort gave way to easing. There was no announcement of night, no signal that demanded obedience, only the gradual retreat of intensity. As shadows lengthened, activity slowed without instruction. Hands that had worked the fields or the riverbanks relaxed. Movement became smaller, more economical. Voices lowered naturally, not out of rule, but out of comfort. This was not rest yet. It was preparation. Ancient Egyptians did not separate the body from its surroundings. They understood that rest begins before sleep. It begins when the environment permits release. As the temperature dropped, breathing changed. Muscles softened. The nervous system, no longer alert to heat and glare, settled into awareness rather than effort. The land itself participated in this change. Animals quieted. Insects shifted their rhythm. The river reflected the fading light instead of scattering it. This shared transition created a collective pause. Night, in this sense, was not a personal experience. It was communal. Everyone felt it at the same time, in the same way. There was no urgency to complete tasks. Nothing needed to be finished before darkness. The day was allowed to end incomplete. This acceptance shaped how night was received. Because the body was not forced forward, it did not resist stopping. Because the land cooled gradually, the mind followed without tension. In ancient Egypt, the beginning of night was not defined by darkness. It was defined by relief. The heat released the land, and in doing so, released the people who lived upon it. Only after this release could true rest begin. When the sun set over ancient Egypt, the Nile did not disappear. It changed its presence. During the day, the river was movement and labor. Boats crossed its surface. Water was lifted, poured, directed. The Nile was worked with, depended on, and watched carefully. At night, this relationship softened. As light faded, the river became quieter, but not still. Its surface darkened, reflecting only fragments of the sky. Sounds carried farther. Small movements, a ripple, a distant splash, the shift of reeds, became more noticeable. The Nile at night was not empty, it was attentive. Ancient Egyptians understood the river as a living force, not a background element. Its moods mattered. Its rhythms were observed rather than controlled. After sunset, the river's role shifted from provider to presence. People did not gather along its banks with urgency. They passed near it calmly, aware but unafraid. The water was respected, not avoided. Night removed the visual dominance of the Nile and replaced it with sound and awareness. Without glare, the river felt closer. Its steady movement offered reassurance. This mattered for rest. The Nile's continuity through the night signaled stability. While human activity slowed, the river continued without interruption. Life did not pause completely. It flowed. This created trust. When the most essential force in daily life remained calm after dark, the night felt safe. There was no sense of abandonment, no fear that order had withdrawn with the sun. Homes near the river absorbed this calm. Air cooled as it moved across the water. Scents changed. Damp earth, plants, silt. These subtle cues marked the transition from effort to stillness. The Nile also shaped how people understood time at night. Without visible landmarks, its sound became a constant reference. It did not measure hours, it marked continuity. As long as the river flowed, the world remained intact. This is why night in ancient Egypt did not feel like an absence. It felt like a quieter version of the same world. The Nile did not demand attention. It offered assurance. In its presence, rest felt permitted. Sleep felt possible. And as darkness settled fully, the river remained, moving steadily, unconcerned with time, guiding the night without words. In ancient Egypt, night was never completely dark. But it was never bright. Light existed without dominance. When the sun withdrew, it did not leave people blind. Instead, smaller sources of light appeared, quietly, locally, and without force. Oil lamps were lit, small fires were tended. Nothing illuminated an entire space. Light was personal. An oil lamp did not erase darkness. it softened it. Its glow reached only as far as it needed to, leaving the edges of rooms undefined. This mattered deeply. Ancient Egyptians did not attempt to defeat the night with light. They worked with it. Darkness was not an enemy to be removed, but a condition to be respected. Because light was limited, attention remained close. The eye did not travel far. Movement slowed naturally. There was no visual pressure to stay alert. This created calm. Oil lamps produced a steady, gentle glow. No harsh contrast. No sharp shadows. The light did not flicker aggressively or demand focus. It allowed the body to remain at ease. This form of lighting shaped how people behaved at night. Tasks were fewer and simpler. Nothing intricate or urgent was attempted. Night was not for precision. It was for presence. Within this softened light, conversations became quieter. Gestures became smaller. Awareness turned inward rather than outward. Darkness remained visible, but it did not threaten. The limited reach of light also preserved mystery. Corners of rooms faded into shadow. Distance dissolved. The world felt contained and intimate. This containment supported rest. Without bright illumination, the mind did not race ahead. There was nothing to stimulate urgency or planning. The body remained grounded in the immediate moment. Light did not extend the day. It allowed the night to remain itself. Ancient Egyptians understood this balance intuitively. They did not seek to fill space with brightness. They accepted partial visibility as enough. This acceptance reduced strain. Eyes adjusted. Breathing slowed. Awareness softened. In this environment, sleep did not arrive suddenly. It approached gradually, almost unnoticed. Light dimmed. Darkness deepened. The boundary between wakefulness and rest became gentle. Night did not overwhelm the senses. It quieted them. And within light that did not compete with darkness, the body found permission to let go. As night settled across ancient Egypt, homes did not close themselves off from the world. They softened. The structure of an Egyptian home was simple, but intentional. Thick mud brick walls held the day's warmth, then slowly released it into the evening air. Rooms were modest in size, designed to contain rather than expand. At night, this containment became comfort. There was no clear separation between living space and resting space. Daily life did not end abruptly. It slowed and folded inward. As lamps were lit, activity narrowed. Tools were set aside. Tasks that required focus or strength were no longer attempted. Nothing urgent waited for the night. Families gathered quietly, not for entertainment, but for presence. Voices were low. Movement was minimal. Silence was not enforced. It emerged naturally. Children rested close to adults. The familiarity of shared space reduced vigilance. Sleep did not require isolation. Within these walls, night felt protected. Darkness remained visible, but it did not dominate. The glow of a single lamp was enough to orient the body without disturbing it. Shadows rested where they fell. There was no expectation to remain awake, no pressure to remain productive. The home allowed stillness. This mattered for rest. Ancient Egyptians understood that the body relaxes more easily when surroundings remain predictable. Night did not transform the home into something unfamiliar. It revealed it more gently. Objects stayed where they had always been. Paths were known. Nothing needed adjustment. This continuity reassured the mind. As activity faded, people reclined naturally. Some slept earlier. Some lingered quietly before rest. There was no correct moment. Sleep arrived when readiness did. Homes did not demand sleep. They supported it. The absence of artificial brightness allowed night to remain intact. No light reached farther than necessary. No sound traveled beyond the walls. Within this contained quiet, awareness softened. The home became a place where the day could dissolve without effort. In ancient Egypt, rest was not separated from life. It was woven into it, quietly, naturally, and without instruction. And within these simple homes, night did not interrupt living. It completed it. In ancient Egypt, night did not require effort. It required allowance. There were no signals telling people when to stop. No systems dividing the evening into segments. No expectation that time needed to be managed. The world slowed on its own. Without clocks, night unfolded as a continuous state rather than a sequence. There was no moment when day ended and night officially began. Instead, activity dissolved gradually, leaving behind only what remained necessary. This natural slowing shaped behavior. People did not rush to complete unfinished work. There was no anxiety about what remained undone. The day was allowed to end imperfectly. This acceptance was essential. When nothing demanded completion, the body released tension easily. Awareness softened rather than collapsed. Rest did not arrive as exhaustion, but as readiness. Night was not something to enter. It was something already present. As movement diminished, stillness expanded without resistance. Sounds became fewer, but not absent. The world did not fall silent. It became quieter. This quiet was familiar. Ancient Egyptians lived within rhythms that repeated daily. Because night arrived the same way each evening, it did not provoke alertness. There was no need to prepare for it. The mind did not anticipate interruption. The body did not remain guarded. Sleep, when it came, was not sharply defined. People drifted in and out of rest naturally. Waking during the night did not cause concern. Darkness remained unchanged. There was no sense of time passing too slowly or too quickly. Without measurement, night did not stretch or shrink. It simply existed. This existence allowed deep rest. The absence of urgency meant the nervous system did not remain partially awake. There was no future moment to monitor, no hour to count. Morning would arrive when it arrived. Until then, night held the world gently. In ancient Egypt, this natural slowing was not considered remarkable. It was ordinary life. And because it was ordinary, it was trusted. The world slowed, the body followed, and rest emerged without being sought. Night did not need to be controlled. It completed the day by letting it fade. In ancient Egypt, sleep did not arrive as a conclusion. It was not a full stop placed at the end of the day. It was a soft passage, a gradual turning away from the visible world. Daylight did not collapse into night. It loosened its grip. As the sun lowered beyond the horizon, activity did not abruptly cease. Movement slowed. Voices softened. Tasks were left unfinished without anxiety. The day was allowed to remain open. For the ancient Egyptians, this mattered. Sleep was not something to enter suddenly. It was something one approached. The body was not commanded to rest. It was invited. There were no sharp signals telling the mind it was time to shut down. No clocks dividing the evening into segments. No expectation that rest should happen at a specific hour. Instead, the evening unfolded in stages. Light faded naturally. Heat released itself from walls and floors. The air along the Nile cooled, carrying familiar scents of water, reeds, and earth. This gradual change shaped how people related to sleep. Rest was not seen as absence, but as a continuation of life in a quieter register. The day did not end when the body lay down. It simply changed form. In this worldview, sleep held dignity. It was not weakness, it was not escape, and it was not a loss of awareness. Sleep belonged to the same rhythm as waking life, a rhythm governed by repetition, patience, and acceptance. Because nothing demanded immediate closure, the mind did not cling to unfinished moments. There was no urgency to resolve every thought before rest. What remained unresolved was allowed to wait. This was essential. By allowing the day to end imperfectly, tension dissolved on its own. The body did not resist rest. The mind did not wrestle with silence. Sleep arrived when readiness appeared, not when discipline forced it. In ancient Egypt, the night was not treated as an interruption of life. It was treated as part of its continuity. And because sleep was not framed as an ending, it did not carry fear. It carried trust. Trust that the world would still be there in the morning. Trust that rest did not require vigilance. Trust that letting go was not dangerous. Sleep, then, was not a boundary to cross. It was a gentle slope, one the body descended naturally without effort, and in that slow descent, the night began to speak in its own quiet language. For the ancient Egyptians, sleep did not belong entirely to this world, but it did not belong fully to the next one either. It existed in between. This was not a metaphor, it was a lived understanding. Sleep was seen as a liminal state, a threshold where the boundaries between the human and the divine grew thin, where the ordinary rules of waking life softened. The body rested, but awareness was not considered absent. Instead, awareness changed its posture. In Egyptian thought, the sleeping person was still present, but present in a quieter form. The senses withdrew, yet the inner faculty remained receptive. This is why sleep carried meaning. It was during sleep that the individual was most open, not weakened, but unguarded. In waking life, attention was outward. In sleep, attention turned inward. This inward turn was not feared, it was respected. The Egyptians did not assume that consciousness disappeared at night. They believed it shifted location. What listened during sleep was not the same part of the self that worked, spoke, or labored during the day. It was a subtler aspect, one capable of receiving impressions without resistance. Because of this, sleep was associated with truth, not the truth of facts or events, but the truth of alignment. Dreams, sensations, and sudden inner images were understood as signals, not commands, not prophecies in the dramatic sense, but communications. Sleep became a meeting ground, a place where gods did not need temples, where messages did not require ritual noise, where meaning arrived softly. This belief shaped behavior. One did not rush into sleep carelessly. One prepared for it. The body was cleaned. The space was made calm. Words were spoken carefully as night approached, not because sleep was dangerous, but because it was significant. To sleep was to enter a shared space, where the human presence briefly loosened its grip on certainty. This is why sleep was never treated as idle time. It was a condition of openness, a state where the self was neither fully anchored to the physical world nor fully released from it. And in that narrow space between worlds, the Egyptians believed something essential could be heard if one rested quietly enough to listen. In ancient Egypt, dreams were not dismissed as mental noise. They were not seen as the mind entertaining itself. They were approached with seriousness, but never with urgency. A dream did not demand immediate action. It asked for attention. The Egyptians believed that dreams carried meaning not because they were dramatic, but because they occurred when the waking self had stepped aside. During the day, the mind was occupied by tasks, by speech, by social roles. At night, those structures loosened. What emerged in dreams was thought to come from a deeper layer of existence. This did not mean that every dream was important. Discernment mattered. Some dreams were considered reflections of the body: hunger, heat, discomfort. Others were echoes of memory. But certain dreams were recognized as different. They arrived with clarity. They repeated themselves. They carried symbols that felt heavier than imagination. These were not interpreted emotionally. They were read. Egyptian culture developed a quiet literacy of dreams. Symbols were not decoded for drama, but for alignment. Water, animals, light, darkness, movement, each carried associations shaped by environment and belief. A dream of flowing water could suggest renewal. Still water might imply stagnation. Flying could represent release. Being restrained could indicate imbalance. Yet interpretation was never rigid. The same symbol could mean different things depending on the dreamer's life, health, and social role. This flexibility mattered. Dreams were not commands from the gods. They were conversations. They suggested rather than ordered. They hinted rather than shouted. A dream might indicate that something was out of harmony. A relationship, a decision, a bodily state. It might offer reassurance rather than warning. What mattered most was tone. Was the dream calm or agitated? Clear or fragmented? Did it leave the dreamer settled or uneasy? The emotional residue of the dream was as important as its imagery. Because of this, dreams were often discussed, not publicly, but quietly, within families, with trusted elders, with priests trained not to predict the future, but to help restore balance. The goal was never fear. The goal was understanding. Dreams were treated as part of life's rhythm. One more way the world communicated when noise fell away. To dream was not to escape reality. It was to receive it in a softer form. And in that softened state, truth could approach without resistance. In ancient Egypt, dreams were not interpreted in isolation. They were not left entirely to personal guesswork. When a dream felt significant, it entered a shared space of understanding. This is where priests played a role, not as mystics predicting fate, but as keepers of balance. Egyptian priests were trained to listen carefully. They did not rush to assign meaning. They asked questions. Who was the dreamer? What was their place in daily life? What had changed recently? What felt unsettled? A dream was never separated from the life that produced it. Symbols were not universal commands. They were relational. Water meant one thing to a farmer, another to a boatman, another to a priest. Animals, too, carried layered meaning. A snake could represent danger, but also protection and renewal. Darkness could signal fear, but just as often it suggested gestation or rest. What mattered was context. Egyptian dream interpretation did not seek certainty, it sought harmony. If a dream suggested imbalance, the response was gentle correction, a prayer, a small ritual, a change in behavior. No dramatic intervention was required. Dream manuals existed, but they were not strict rulebooks. They offered guidance, not verdicts. A symbol might be listed with several possible meanings, not one final answer. This openness prevented fear. Dreams were not used to frighten people into obedience. They were used to help individuals realign with the order of the world. This order, Ma'at, was the central value of Egyptian life: truth, balance, proper measure. Dream interpretation served this principle quietly. If a dream caused distress, the goal was not to analyze it endlessly, but to restore calm. A disturbed sleeper was considered out of harmony, and harmony mattered more than explanation. This is why dream interpretation was never rushed. It unfolded slowly, over days, if needed. Silence was allowed between conversations. Reflection was valued. The priest did not replace the dreamer's intuition. They supported it. Meaning emerged through patience. In this way, dreams did not disrupt life. They guided it softly. They were not warnings shouted from the dark, but subtle adjustments whispered during rest. And when interpreted with care, dreams returned the dreamer to sleep, not into anxiety, but into balance. In ancient Egypt, silence at night was not emptiness, it was presence. The quiet hours were not treated as a lack of activity, but as a state in which the world became more delicate, and therefore deserving of care. Silence was not enforced through rule, it emerged through understanding. As night settled, voices naturally softened. Speech became purposeful rather than continuous. Nothing needed to be said simply to fill space. This restraint was intentional. The Egyptians believed that sound carried weight. Words spoken at night were thought to linger longer, to travel farther than those spoken during the day. Because of this, unnecessary noise was avoided, not out of fear, but out of respect. Silence was understood as a protective condition, one that shielded the sleeping body and the open spirit. During sleep, the individual was believed to be more receptive, less guarded, more permeable. In such a state, the surrounding environment mattered deeply. Loud sounds could disturb more than rest. They could disrupt balance. This is why nights were kept calm. Children were guided gently toward quiet. Adults avoided raised voices. Movement was deliberate and minimal. The goal was not absolute silence, but harmony. Natural sounds were accepted. The flow of the Nile, the movement of air, the distant call of animals. These sounds belonged to the order of the world. They reassured rather than alarmed. Human noise, however, was treated differently. It was controlled not by law, but by shared awareness. Silence created a boundary around the home. Within it, sleep could deepen without interruption. This quiet also had a spiritual dimension. In Egyptian belief, silence allowed subtle forces to move freely. It made space for divine presence, for dreams to form clearly, for messages to arrive without distortion. Noise, by contrast, was thought to scatter meaning. To remain quiet at night was to remain aligned. Silence protected not by blocking the world, but by allowing it to remain ordered. This protection extended beyond the individual. A quiet night preserved the balance of the community. It ensured that rest was shared, that no one was pulled back into wakefulness unnecessarily. In this way, silence was a collective act, not passive, but intentional. And within that shared quiet, sleep was not something fragile. It was supported by walls, by ritual, by the understanding that stillness itself could guard the night. In ancient Egypt, sleep was understood as a crossing, not a departure, but a passage. It was the moment when the boundaries of ordinary life softened enough to allow movement between realms. Not dramatic movement, not visible travel, but a subtle shifting of position. The sleeper did not leave the world. They stood at its edge. This belief shaped how sleep was approached and respected. To sleep was to enter a state where the rules of the day no longer applied fully, yet the order of the cosmos remained present. The Egyptians imagined existence as layered. The visible world of daily life rested beside unseen domains. The realm of the gods, the realm of the dead, the realm of forces that shaped fate quietly. Sleep touched all of them. When the body lay still, the soul was believed to move more freely, not in danger, but in openness. This openness was not considered weakness. It was considered access. Because of this, sleep was never treated lightly. One did not fall into it carelessly. One arrived at it prepared. The threshold mattered. Just as temples mark transitions between ordinary space and sacred space, sleep marked a transition between ordinary awareness and a deeper state of perception. This is why nighttime behavior was restrained, why silence mattered, why the environment was kept calm. The threshold needed to remain stable. Crossing it too abruptly, through noise, fear, or disturbance, was thought to disorient the soul. But when entered gently, sleep allowed alignment. The Egyptians did not imagine the sleeper wandering aimlessly between worlds. They believed the passage was guided by order, by divine presence, by the enduring structure of the universe. Nothing was random. Sleep, then, was a moment of trust. Trust that the soul could loosen its grip without being lost. Trust that the body would be returned to safely. Trust that the world would remain intact through the night. This understanding removed fear from rest. Sleep was not a fall into darkness. It was a standing at the doorway, 1 foot in the world of breath and form, 1 foot in the quieter realm beyond it. And in that balanced position, the sleeper did not disappear. They listened. They received. They remained held by the order that governed both worlds. In ancient Egypt, waking was not treated as a command. It was a return. Morning did not arrive with force. There was no sound designed to pull the body suddenly from rest, no signal that demanded immediate alertness. Light changed first. It entered gradually, touching walls and floors before reaching the eyes. The air warmed slowly. Sounds returned one by one. The river, distant movement, quiet voices. The body followed these changes without resistance. Waking was not a break from sleep. It was its continuation. Because sleep had not been forced, waking did not require recovery. The Egyptians did not imagine the night as something to escape. They did not rush out of rest. There was no fear of having slept too long or too deeply. Time was not lost during the night. It had simply passed. This absence of urgency shaped the transition into day. People rose when readiness appeared. Some lingered briefly between states, sitting quietly, stretching slowly, allowing awareness to reassemble itself. This pause mattered. The boundary between sleep and waking remained soft. The mind was not shocked into activity. Thought returned gently. Because waking was unhurried, the residue of dreams did not disappear immediately. Images, feelings, and impressions were allowed to settle. This created continuity. What had been experienced in sleep did not vanish at sunrise. It remained available, to be remembered, to be reflected upon, or simply to fade naturally. The day did not demand instant engagement. Work would come, movement would return, but not all at once. This slow return preserved balance. The Egyptians believed that beginning the day calmly supported order throughout it. Just as night required gentleness, morning required patience. To rush waking was to carry disturbance forward. To rise slowly was to remain aligned. In this way, sleep did not end abruptly. It opened into the day. The night released the body carefully, just as it had received it. And because waking did not interrupt rest violently, the day began without strain. Life resumed, not through urgency, but through readiness. In ancient Egypt, sleep was not something one tried to achieve. It was not pursued, measured, or commanded. It was allowed. There was no concept of trying to sleep, no pressure placed on the body to perform rest correctly. Sleep was understood as a response, not an obligation. When the conditions were right, it came. This understanding removed struggle from rest. The Egyptians did not believe that sleep could be forced through effort. Effort belonged to the day. Night required release. Because of this, resistance dissolved naturally. If sleep did not arrive immediately, it was not treated as failure. The body remained still. The environment remained calm. Nothing was disrupted. Rest did not require unconsciousness to be valuable. Lying quietly in the dark was already considered restorative. The boundary between rest and sleep was not rigid. This flexibility mattered. Without anxiety about falling asleep, the mind did not tighten around the problem of wakefulness. Thoughts were allowed to pass without engagement. Awareness softened on its own. Sleep arrived when readiness emerged, not when impatience demanded it. The Egyptians trusted the body's timing. They did not intervene aggressively in the natural rhythm. There were no substances designed to induce sleep forcibly, no rituals intended to overpower wakefulness. Instead, the environment was adjusted gently. Light was reduced. Sound was softened. Movement slowed. Nothing more was required. This approach preserved dignity and rest. Sleep was not something taken from the body. It was something the body offered when it felt safe. Because of this, sleep remained deep when it arrived. It was not fragmented by effort or concern. The body entered rest without tension and left it without resistance. This trust extended beyond sleep itself. By allowing rest to come naturally, the Egyptians reinforced their broader relationship with life. They did not rush transitions. They did not force closure. They allowed states to complete themselves. Sleep, then, was not a task to accomplish. It was a condition to permit. And in that permission, the body found its way into rest without instruction, without urgency, and without struggle. In ancient Egypt, dreams were not treated as random images produced by a resting mind. They were not dismissed as illusion, distraction, or mental excess. They were understood as records. Not records in the sense of written documents, but records of alignment, of how the individual stood in relation to the wider order of the world. A dream was not evaluated by how strange it appeared, but by how clearly it arrived. Clarity mattered more than content. A simple dream, calmly experienced, could be considered meaningful. A dramatic dream, filled with confusion, might be set aside. The Egyptians believed that the mind, when released from the demands of daylight, became capable of registering subtle information. Not information gathered through effort, but information received through stillness. In this sense, dreams were closer to observation than imagination. They were moments when the individual stopped imposing structure on experience, allowing impressions to form without resistance. Because of this, dreams were never mocked or trivialized. Even ordinary people treated them with care. A dream did not need to predict the future to matter. It only needed to reflect something true about the present, an imbalance, a reassurance, a quiet correction. Dreams were considered part of life's ongoing documentation, a nightly continuation of awareness rather than its suspension. This view removed fear. If dreams were records, they were not threats. They were signals. Signals did not demand obedience. They invited attention. The Egyptians did not wake in a hurry to analyze every image. They allowed the feeling of the dream to linger. They observed how it settled in the body. Did it leave calm? Did it leave disturbance? Did it fade easily or remain present? These responses mattered more than interpretation. By treating dreams as records rather than fantasies, the Egyptians preserved their dignity. Dreaming was not an escape from reality. It was another way reality expressed itself when noise withdrew. And because dreams were allowed to exist quietly, they became something that guided, not through force, but through recognition. In ancient Egypt, dreams were not left entirely to memory. They were studied, recorded, and organized. Fragments of what are now called dream manuals have survived. Texts that listed dreams alongside their possible meanings. These were not mystical spellbooks. They were practical tools. Each entry followed a simple structure, a description of the dream, an indication of whether it was considered favorable or troubling, and a short explanation. What is striking is their tone. The language is calm, measured, free of urgency. A dream might be labeled good or not good, but never catastrophic. There is no sense of panic in the text. This reflects how Egyptians approached meaning itself. Dream manuals did not claim absolute authority. They offered reference points. A dream of drinking clear water might suggest well-being. A dream of falling might suggest instability. But these were tendencies, not verdicts. The manuals acknowledged variability. The same dream could carry different weight depending on who dreamed it and under what circumstances. This flexibility prevented fear. Dreams were not used to control behavior through threat. They were used to support balance. The existence of these manuals also shows something deeper. Dreams were considered worthy of attention across all levels of society. They were not reserved for priests or elites. Ordinary people consulted them. Families passed interpretations quietly among themselves. Dreams belonged to daily life. Yet even with written references, interpretation remained careful. The manuals did not replace reflection. They complemented it. A dream was not solved the moment it was matched to a line of text. It was considered alongside emotion, health, and recent experience. In this way, dream manuals functioned less like instructions and more like maps. They did not tell the dreamer where to go. They showed possible terrain. And then they left space for judgment, for patience, and for the dream to settle naturally into understanding. In ancient Egypt, dreams were not judged by their imagery alone. What mattered most was how the dream felt. The Egyptians understood that meaning did not always arrive through symbols. Often, it arrived through tone. A dream that appeared strange or unfamiliar could still be considered good if it left the dreamer calm. A dream that seemed ordinary could be troubling if it carried unease. This distinction was subtle, but essential. Good dreams were those that settled the body. They did not agitate the breath. They did not pull the mind into fear. Even if the images were unusual, their effect was stabilizing. Troubled dreams, by contrast, disrupted balance. They lingered uncomfortably. They left behind restlessness rather than clarity. The Egyptians paid close attention to this residue. They did not rush to interpret a dream before noticing its aftertaste. The emotional imprint mattered more than narrative logic. A dream that caused fear was not automatically seen as a warning. Fear itself was examined. Was it brief or persistent? Did it fade with waking or remain present? A persistent disturbance suggested imbalance, not danger, but misalignment. This approach prevented overreaction. Dreams were not used to predict disaster. They were used to restore equilibrium. If a dream unsettled someone, the response was gentle. Extra rest, quiet reflection, a small ritual or prayer. Nothing dramatic was required. Good dreams did not demand celebration. Troubled dreams did not demand alarm. Both were part of the same system of communication. By treating dreams this way, the Egyptians avoided obsession. They did not analyze endlessly. They listened, adjusted, and moved on. Dreams were understood as nightly signals, sometimes clear, sometimes unclear. Their value lay not in certainty, but in awareness. And because dreams were approached without fear, sleep remained a place of trust. The night did not become threatening. It remained a space where balance could be restored quietly. In ancient Egypt, a dream was never separated from the person who dreamed it. Meaning was not fixed. It moved with the individual. The same vision could speak differently to different lives. A farmer dreaming of water might understand abundance or warning. A priest dreaming of the same image might consider ritual balance. A child might experience reassurance rather than instruction. This personal dimension mattered deeply. Dreams were not treated as universal messages broadcast to all. They were understood as intimate encounters, shaped by age, role, health, and circumstance. Because of this, interpretation remained cautious. One did not assume that a dream carried the same weight for everyone, nor was a dream detached from recent events. Illness, grief, joy, fatigue, all were considered part of the dream's context. This prevented rigid conclusions. Night visions were not used to assign destiny. They were used to understand position. Where am I unsettled? Where am I at ease? What feels out of alignment? These questions guided reflection. Often, a dream required no explanation at all. Its purpose was simply to reveal a feeling that had not yet found words. By honoring personal meaning, the Egyptians protected the dreamer's agency. The dream did not replace judgment. It supported it. Night visions, then, were mirrors, not instructions. They reflected the inner state quietly, allowing the individual to recognize what needed attention without force or fear. And because meaning remained personal, dreams did not overwhelm. They guided gently, leaving room for choice and space for rest. And in ancient Egypt, sleep was not entered abruptly. The mind, like the body, was prepared. Evening carried its own quiet discipline. As the day released its grip, attention turned inward. Conversations slowed. Tasks were left behind without insistence. This shift was intentional. The Egyptians believed that what the mind carried into sleep shaped what the night could reveal. A restless mind produced restless dreams. A settled mind allowed clarity. Because of this, the hours before sleep were treated with care. Noise was reduced, light softened, movement became minimal. These were not rules imposed from above. They were habits shaped by understanding. The mind was gently guided away from stimulation and toward stillness. Reflection often replaced discussion. Silence replaced explanation. This created a clear threshold. Sleep was not simply the body lying down. It was a mental release. Thoughts were not forced away. They were allowed to pass without engagement. The Egyptians did not believe in conquering the mind. They believed in easing it. Simple acts supported this process: washing the body, arranging the sleeping space, saying a short prayer or intention. Nothing elaborate was required. These gestures signaled readiness. The mind recognized that nothing more was demanded of it. Attention could loosen safely. This preparation protected the quality of sleep. When the mind entered rest without tension, dreams arrived without distortion. There was no urgency to control what appeared. Sleep unfolded naturally. By treating the hours before rest as meaningful, the Egyptians preserved the night as a space of receptivity. They understood that sleep did not begin at the moment of unconsciousness. It began earlier, in the way the mind released the day. And because this release was gentle, the night remained calm. In ancient Egypt, dreams were not treated as public material. They were not shared casually or widely. A dream belonged first to the one who experienced it. This did not mean dreams were hidden out of fear. It meant they were handled with care. Sharing a dream required trust. Dreams were spoken about quietly, often within the family, or with someone considered wise enough to listen without judgment. Not every dream needed an audience. The Egyptians understood that meaning could be altered by exposure. Spoken too quickly, a dream might lose its clarity. Discussed too widely, it could invite confusion rather than understanding. This restraint protected both the dream and the dreamer. Dreams were not used for attention. They were not tools for status or influence. They were personal signals. Because of this, dreams did not become distorted by performance. There was no pressure to make them impressive. No need to exaggerate or dramatize. Listening mattered more than telling. When a dream was shared, the listener did not interrupt. They did not rush to interpret. Silence was allowed after the telling. This pause created space for meaning to settle. Often, the act of speaking the dream was enough. Understanding emerged without explanation. The Egyptians recognized that not all knowledge benefits from circulation. Some insights require containment. Dreams were one of these. By keeping dreams private, their influence remained gentle. They guided without overwhelming. They informed without disturbing. This practice also preserved sleep itself. If dreams became social obligations, the night would lose its quiet. By keeping dreams close, the Egyptians ensured that sleep remained a place of rest, not performance. And within that protected space, dreams could continue to serve their purpose, not as spectacle, but as quiet companions in the ongoing balance of life. In ancient Egypt, Dreams were never treated as final judgments. They were not commands written in stone. They did not override choice. A dream pointed. It did not decide. This distinction protected people from fear. The Egyptians believed that life unfolded within order, but that order allowed movement. Dreams participated in this movement by offering direction, not destiny. A troubling dream did not mean misfortune was inevitable. It suggested attention was needed. A comforting dream did not guarantee success. It suggested alignment. In both cases, responsibility remained with the individual. Dreams were considered advisory. They illuminated conditions rather than outcomes. Because of this, they did not paralyze action. One did not wait passively for dreams to dictate the future, nor did one act recklessly because of reassurance. Dreams were weighed alongside waking experience, health, relationships, work, recent changes. All were considered part of the same field of meaning. This integration mattered. By refusing to elevate dreams above life itself, the Egyptians preserved balance. Dreams did not compete with reason. They complemented it. This approach also protected sleep. If dreams were treated as fate, sleep would become a source of anxiety. The night would carry pressure. Instead, sleep remained safe. Dreams arrived without threat. They departed without demand. Meaning unfolded over time, sometimes slowly, sometimes not at all. Not every dream required interpretation. Not every symbol required response. Some dreams were complete simply by being experienced. This acceptance preserved trust in the night. Dreams were allowed to guide without ruling, to suggest without forcing, to inform without disturbing. And because they were never made absolute, they remained gentle. In ancient Egypt, wisdom was not found in certainty, but in proportion. Dreams respected that proportion. They offered light, not chains. When night fell over ancient Egypt, the temples did not fall asleep. They became still. This distinction mattered. Temples were not places of constant activity. They were places of presence. During the day, temples belonged partly to the visible world. People arrived with offerings. Voices echoed softly between stone columns. Movement, though restrained, was present. At night, this changed. The transition was gradual. No announcement marked the closing of the temple day. No signal declared the beginning of the sacred hours. The light faded. Footsteps thinned. The outer spaces emptied first. The inner sanctuaries remained. Contrary to modern assumptions, temples were not abandoned at night. But they were not occupied in the way daytime spaces were. Night was not a time for gathering. It was a time for containment. The Egyptians believed that silence did not remove sacred presence. It intensified it. During the night, temples were thought to be most aligned with the unseen order of the cosmos. Noise would have disrupted this alignment. Movement would have disturbed it. So the temple entered stillness. Only a small number of priests remained, not to perform elaborate rituals, not to invoke spectacle. Their role was preservation. They tended to the order of the space rather than its activity. This included maintaining cleanliness, ensuring that sacred objects remained undisturbed, and guarding the quiet itself. Night duty was not dramatic. It was repetitive, predictable, and deeply intentional. The Egyptians believed that the gods did not require constant attention, they required respect for rhythm. Just as humans needed rest, the sacred needed periods of withdrawal. Temples were not stages, they were thresholds. At night, those thresholds narrowed. The air inside temples changed after sunset. Stone released the heat of the day slowly. Shadows deepened without movement. Oil lamps were used sparingly. Too much light was considered intrusive. The goal was not illumination, it was continuity. The gods were not summoned at night, they were allowed. This belief shaped ritual behavior profoundly. There were no loud prayers echoing through the darkness, no chants intended to dominate silence. Instead, if words were spoken at all, they were minimal. Often, silence itself was the offering. The Egyptians understood silence as an active condition. It was not emptiness. It was balance held without interference. This understanding extended to the priests themselves. Night duty was not prestigious. It was trusted. Only those who could maintain inner stillness were assigned to it. A restless presence would disrupt the space. An anxious mind would fracture the quiet. Therefore, priests approached the night hours differently. They moved slowly. They avoided unnecessary gestures. They spoke only when required. Their bodies mirrored the calm they were meant to preserve. This was not asceticism. It was alignment. Temples were believed to be living structures, not alive in the biological sense, but responsive. Sound, movement, and intention affected them. At night, when the world withdrew, the temple was thought to listen. This is why silence mattered. It allowed the structure itself to remain receptive. The Egyptians believed that the gods did not communicate through noise. They communicated through order. Order required stillness. Nighttime temple practices reflected this philosophy. Ritual objects were not handled unless necessary. Doors remained closed. Curtains stayed drawn. Nothing was rearranged. This lack of interference was itself an act of devotion. The absence of action was not neglect. It was trust. The gods did not need constant proof of loyalty. They required space to remain undisturbed. This belief distinguished Egyptian temple practice from later religious traditions that emphasized night vigils or continuous prayer. In Egypt, sacred time included rest. The night did not demand attention, it demanded restraint. The silence of the temple mirrored the silence of the surrounding world. Outside, the Nile flowed steadily. Inside, nothing moved. This harmony mattered. Temples were not isolated from their environment. They were embedded within it. Night connected them more deeply to the land. The same darkness that covered fields and homes also filled sanctuaries. This shared condition created unity. The gods were not separated from the world at night. They rested within it. This is why temples did not glow brightly after sunset. Excessive light would have broken the continuity. The sacred was not meant to dominate the night. It was meant to exist within it. This approach prevented fear. Night in Egyptian temples was not ominous. It was composed. There were no warnings associated with entering the sacred space after dark. No stories of danger for those who passed nearby. Instead, there was respect. People avoided temples at night not out of terror, but out of understanding. The night belonged to the gods, and the gods preferred quiet. This preference shaped architectural choices as well. Temple interiors were designed to hold stillness. High ceilings absorbed sound. Thick walls insulated against external noise. Courtyards were arranged to limit echoes. Passageways curved rather than stretched straight. All of this reduced disturbance. Even during the day, temples maintained restraint. At night, this restraint deepened. The space did not demand attention. It invited withdrawal. This had a psychological effect. Knowing that the sacred was calm allowed people to rest more fully. The gods were not restless. They were not watching anxiously. They were present without tension. This belief influenced how individuals approach sleep. If the gods themselves withdrew into silence, humans could do the same. Night was not a time of vulnerability. It was a time of shared stillness. Temples embodied this truth physically. They stood unmoving as the world slowed. The Egyptians believed that the maintenance of cosmic order did not require constant action. It required consistency. Night after night, the same quiet returned. Nothing dramatic occurred. Nothing needed to. This repetition reinforced trust. The sacred did not disappear when unseen. It remained, steady and unchanged. This understanding is one reason Egyptian religious practice endured for millennia. It did not rely on excitement. It relied on rhythm. Night temple silence was part of that rhythm. It taught patience. It taught restraint. It taught confidence in continuity. In a world without artificial light, darkness was not an interruption. It was a condition to inhabit. The temple did not fight the night. It aligned with it. And in that alignment, the sacred remained stable. The gods were not summoned. They were already there. Silence did not remove them. It revealed their preferred state, stillness. In ancient Egypt, death was not imagined as disappearance. It was imagined as stillness, not emptiness, not absence, but a deep, uninterrupted quiet. Life, as the Egyptians understood it, was movement within order. Breath moved, water flowed, the sun crossed the sky. Death did not cancel this order. It withdrew from motion. When someone died, the world did not react with alarm. There was no sense that something unnatural had occurred. Death was expected, not because life was fragile, but because rest was necessary. The body had completed its movement. This idea shaped how death was spoken about. There was no language of rupture, no vocabulary of annihilation. Instead, death was framed as a pause, a state in which motion ceased but presence remained. The dead were not gone. They were still. This stillness was not feared. It was respected. Just as night brought stillness to the land, death brought stillness to the individual. Neither was treated as hostile. The Egyptians did not imagine the dead as restless spirits wandering without place. They imagined them as settled. To die was not to fall into chaos. It was to withdraw from effort. Life required maintenance. Breathing, eating, working, enduring heat and labor. Death relieved the body of these demands. This relief was not tragic in itself. Grief existed, but fear did not dominate. The dead were not pitied for what they lost. They were acknowledged for what they completed. This understanding removed urgency from death rituals. There was no rush to seal the moment, no pressure to resolve everything immediately. Death was not a crisis. It was a transition, a movement from activity into rest. This rest was considered earned. Those who had lived within order were believed to enter stillness smoothly. Those who had disrupted balance required correction, but even this correction was restorative, not punitive. Death was not a judgment, it was a condition, a quieter one. The Egyptians believed that the dead did not experience time as the living did. Time slowed beyond measure. There was no schedule to follow, no sequence to complete. Stillness itself became the state of being. This belief profoundly shaped Egyptian culture. It allowed people to approach death without panic. It allowed mourning without despair. It allowed continuity without obsession. Death did not threaten life's meaning. It completed it, just as the night completes the day, without erasing it. The Egyptians did not separate sleep and death with sharp boundaries. They understood them through the same language. Both were states of withdrawal. Both involved the body lying still. Both were marked by silence. This resemblance was not ignored. It was embraced. Sleep was often described using the same metaphors applied to death, not because sleep was dangerous, but because rest was sacred. To sleep was to rehearse stillness. To die was to enter it fully. This shared language softened the fear of death. If sleep returned each night without harm, death could be understood as a deeper version of the same release. The Egyptians did not imagine the dead as unconscious, nor did they imagine sleepers as absent. In both states, awareness was believed to change form. Sleep allowed the soul to loosen its attachment to the body. Death completed that loosening. But neither severed existence. This continuity mattered. Because sleep and death were linked, sleep itself carried dignity. It was not treated as wasted time. It was a necessary withdrawal. And because death resembled sleep, it was not framed as violence. The body rested. The soul continued. This belief influenced daily life deeply. People did not resist sleep aggressively. They did not fear losing control. Each night, they practiced trust. Trust that awareness would return. Trust that withdrawal was safe. Death extended this trust beyond the body. This is why sleep metaphors appear frequently in funerary texts. The dead are described as resting, as lying peacefully, as dwelling quietly. These were not euphemisms. They reflected genuine belief. The Egyptians believed that rest was not emptiness. It was fullness without effort. Sleep prepared the individual for death by familiarizing them with stillness. Death returned the individual to a permanent version of that stillness. Neither state erased identity. The name remained. The presence endured. What changed was the relationship to movement. Life required participation. Death required none. This distinction allowed the living to mourn without terror. The dead were not lost in chaos. They were resting within order, just as the sleeper rested within the night. This parallel also reinforced the importance of peaceful sleep. A disturbed sleeper was out of alignment. A disturbed death ritual was equally disruptive. Both required calm. Both required respect. By aligning sleep and death so closely, the Egyptians created a culture in which rest was not suspicious, it was trusted. Mummification is often misunderstood as a dramatic or macabre process. In ancient Egypt, it was neither. It was careful work, performed slowly, often under the cover of night. Night was chosen not for secrecy, but for suitability. The absence of heat, the absence of crowds, the absence of interruption. These conditions supported precision. Mummification was not rushed. It followed a rhythm. Each step required patience. Each movement was deliberate. There was no sense of urgency. The body was not a problem to solve. It was a presence to prepare. Night offered the correct atmosphere. Quiet allowed concentration. Stillness allowed respect. The Egyptians believed that noise disrupted alignment. Mummification required alignment above all. This was not a medical procedure. It was a transitional one. The body was being prepared for rest, not for display, not for preservation as spectacle. Preservation served continuity, not fascination. Night also mirrored the condition of death itself. Just as the deceased had withdrawn from daylight activity, the work surrounding them withdrew from daylight noise. This symmetry mattered. Those who performed the work were not hurried laborers. They were caretakers of transition. They did not treat the body as inert material. They treated it as a vessel entering stillness. Silence supported this attitude. Words were unnecessary. Gestures were minimal. The work progressed without conversation. This quiet was not solemn in the dramatic sense. It was composed. There was no performance of grief, no exaggerated ritual. Respect was expressed through restraint. The night allowed this restraint to feel natural. Light was used sparingly, only what was needed. Too much illumination would have broken the continuity. The body was not exposed, it was sheltered. Each action reinforced the idea that death was not disruption, but preparation for rest. This is why mummification took time. Time itself slowed. Days passed without urgency. The dead were not waiting impatiently. They were already at rest. The living adjusted their pace accordingly. This approach prevented fear. There was no sense of contamination or danger. The dead were not threatening. They were calm. Night protected this calm. By working during quiet hours, the Egyptians ensured that the transition from life to rest occurred without violence. The body was not handled aggressively. It was guided. This guidance reflected the broader worldview. Nothing was forced, nothing was rushed. Death unfolded within order, just as sleep unfolded each night. And because the work respected this order, the dead were believed to enter stillness smoothly, not abruptly, not fearfully, but as one enters sleep, having completed the day. In ancient Egypt, tombs were not conceived as places of dread. They were not imagined as dark traps for the living or as prisons for the dead. They were houses, quiet houses. This distinction shaped everything: their architecture, their decoration, and the way people related to them. A tomb was not a site of loss. It was a site of continuation. The Egyptians did not believe that death removed a person from the structure of the world. It relocated them within it. Because of this, tombs were designed to resemble ordered spaces rather than sealed voids. Walls were arranged deliberately. Passageways followed measured proportions. Objects were placed with intention. Nothing was chaotic. The tomb was not meant to confuse. It was meant to stabilize. Just as a home provided structure for daily life, the tomb provided structure for stillness. This understanding eliminated fear. People did not avoid tombs because they were dangerous. They approached them with restraint because they were inhabited. Not inhabited by threat, but by presence. The dead were believed to dwell quietly, not to wander. This belief mattered. It prevented the imagination from filling the tomb with anxiety. There were no stories of the dead seeking disturbance. There were no expectations of unrest. The tomb was a settled place. Silence was not emptiness there. It was order maintained without effort. This is why tombs were often located away from the noise of daily life, not to hide death, but to protect stillness. Distance preserved calm. The Egyptians believed that too much activity near a tomb would disrupt rest. Movement carried weight. Sound travelled. Stillness needed space. Tombs were also constructed with familiarity in mind. Scenes of daily life were painted on walls. Food, work, family moments, not as nostalgia, but as continuity. These images were not reminders of what was lost. They were affirmations of what remained meaningful. The dead were not cut off from life. They rested within its patterns. This approach removed terror from the concept of burial. The tomb was not a final confinement. It was a prepared environment, one that mirrored order, balance, and calm. This is why grave goods were practical rather than symbolic alone. They were not offerings to appease fear. They were supports for rest. The Egyptians did not imagine the dead struggling to survive. They imagined them settled. The tomb was not locked against intrusion because the dead were dangerous. It was sealed because disturbance was unnecessary. Disturbance would have served no purpose. The dead did not require constant interaction. They required peace. This belief created a different relationship with mortality. Death was not hidden away. It was integrated. People lived alongside tombs. They passed near them without anxiety. There was no sense of contamination, no fear of proximity. The dead were not excluded from the world. They simply occupied a quieter zone within it. This quiet was respected. By understanding tombs as houses of stillness, the Egyptians preserved dignity in death. They did not dramatize absence, they stabilized presence. And in doing so, they ensured that death did not fracture the world of the living. It remained part of the same order. At the heart of the Egyptian understanding of death was the belief that rest occurred within order, not outside it. The universe, as they understood it, was not divided between life and death. It was unified by balance. This balance, Ma'at, governed everything. The movement of the sun, the flow of the Nile, the rhythm of seasons, the pattern of night and day. Death did not interrupt this rhythm. It joined it. To die was not to leave the system. It was to assume a different position within it. The dead were believed to rest within the same cosmic structure as the living. They did not float beyond reach. They did not fall into chaos. They remained held. This belief eliminated the idea of abandonment. No one was lost after death. They were repositioned. Just as night repositioned the world into stillness, death repositioned the individual. This rest was not passive. It was sustained by order. The Egyptians believed that order itself was active, not in motion, but in maintenance. Stillness was not collapse, it was stability achieved. The dead rested because the world continued to function correctly. The sun still rose, the Nile still flowed, the stars still moved in their paths. As long as these rhythms continued, rest was secure. This is why death rituals focus so heavily on alignment. The goal was not immortality as escape. It was continuity within order. The dead did not need to act. They needed to belong. This belonging was ensured through preparation, through burial, through naming, through memory. But memory was not clung to desperately. It was allowed to settle. The Egyptians did not fear forgetting. They feared disorder. As long as order was preserved, individual presence did not need constant reinforcement. The dead rested without demand. They did not call back to the living. They did not require attention. They existed quietly, as part of the larger whole. This belief influenced how people lived. Knowing that rest awaited within order, people did not panic about endings. They did not rush to secure permanence. Life was lived within rhythm, not against it. Death confirmed this rhythm, rather than breaking it. The night confirmed the same truth daily. Each evening, the world withdrew. Each morning it returned. No intervention was required. Death followed the same logic, a withdrawal without disappearance. This understanding softened the entire human experience. Fear was not necessary to maintain meaning. Urgency was not required to preserve value. The world did not depend on constant effort. It depended on alignment. Rest, whether nightly or final, was not a failure of life. It was its completion. The Egyptians did not seek to escape death. They sought to enter it correctly. Correctly meant calmly, within order, without resistance. This approach preserved dignity for the living and the dead alike. Death was not an enemy to defeat. It was a condition to enter. And because it was entered within the same structure that supported life, it did not threaten meaning. It reinforced it. The world remained whole. Stillness did not undo existence. It stabilized it. And within that stability, the dead rested. Not in isolation, not in fear, but in quiet continuity with everything that continued to move. Not all rituals in ancient Egypt were public. Not all practices required temples, priests, or ceremonies. Much of Egyptian spiritual life unfolded quietly, within homes, within routines, within gestures so small they rarely left record. These practices were not hidden because they were forbidden. They were hidden because they were ordinary. The Egyptians did not believe that meaning required visibility. They believed it required consistency. Small actions, repeated calmly, were considered just as powerful as grand rites, especially at night. As daylight faded and public life withdrew, another layer of ritual began. This layer did not announce itself. It did not demand participation. It simply continued. Homes became the primary spaces of practice, not temples, not monuments, living spaces. The Egyptians understood the home as a threshold, a place where the individual stood closest to daily balance. Here, protection mattered more than spectacle. Before sleep, small gestures were performed almost without thought. A lamp adjusted, an object placed deliberately, a word spoken softly, sometimes not aloud at all. These were not spells in the dramatic sense. They were affirmations of order. The Egyptians believed that the world responded to repetition, not to force. Quiet practices created stability by their regularity. One of the most common was simple orientation. Sleeping spaces were arranged intentionally, bodies aligned, objects placed where they had always been. This consistency reassured both mind and body. Change was minimized at night. Night was not a time to experiment, it was a time to preserve. Protection during sleep did not come from vigilance, it came from familiarity. Familiar space allowed the body to release tension. Another practice involved breath. Though not formalized as technique, the Egyptians were attentive to breathing at rest. A calm, even breath was considered a sign of alignment. Disturbed breathing indicated imbalance. Sleep was approached with gentleness. The body was not commanded into rest. It was guided. Water also played a role. Washing before sleep was common, not for purity alone, but for transition. Water marked the movement from day into night. This act was not rushed, it was quiet. The sensation of water on skin signaled release. The day was allowed to leave the body. Objects of protection were often present in sleeping spaces. Small amulets, images of protective figures. These were not talismans of fear. They were reminders of continuity. Protection did not imply danger, it implied care. The Egyptians did not imagine the night as hostile, but they acknowledged vulnerability. Sleep opened the individual. Quiet practices closed nothing. They supported openness safely. Words spoken at night were chosen carefully. Not because speech was forbidden, but because words carried weight in stillness. Excessive speech scattered attention. Silence gathered it. When words were spoken, they were brief. A name, a phrase, an acknowledgement. Nothing elaborate. The goal was not invocation. It was reassurance. Some practices involved repetition. Simple phrases repeated softly, not as chants, but as anchors. Repetition calmed the nervous system long before it had a name. The Egyptians understood this intuitively. By repeating the same words nightly, the mind learned safety. The body recognized pattern. Pattern reduced vigilance. Night rituals also included restraint. Certain actions were avoided after dark. Arguments were postponed. Decisions delayed. Corrections withheld. Night was not a time for resolution. It was a time for suspension. This suspension protected rest. By refusing to carry conflict into the night, the Egyptians preserved the quality of sleep. They did not demand closure before rest. What remained unfinished was allowed to remain so. This was not negligence, it was wisdom. The belief was simple. The night could not hold tension safely. Tension belonged to daylight. Night belonged to release. These practices extended beyond individual homes. Communities observed quiet collectively. Movement slowed. Noise diminished. There were no enforced curfews, no imposed silence. Stillness emerged naturally. The absence of artificial light supported this. Darkness unified experience. Everyone shared the same condition. This shared darkness created cohesion. People rested together, even if separately. The Egyptians believed that order was sustained not by constant action, but by regular withdrawal. Night provided this withdrawal. Hidden rituals reinforced it. These practices were not recorded extensively because they were not exceptional. They were lived. They did not belong to texts. They belonged to habit. This is why they feel elusive today. They leave little trace. Yet they shaped daily experience profoundly. They taught patience. They taught restraint. They taught trust. Trust that the world did not require constant supervision. Trust that rest was safe. Trust that silence would not erase meaning. Quiet practices also shaped perception of the sacred. The sacred was not confined to temples. It existed in repetition, in consistency, in care. A small action, done nightly, held more power than an occasional grand gesture. This understanding prevented burnout. Spiritual life was not exhausting. It was integrated. No special effort was required. The sacred was woven into the ordinary. Night was the clearest expression of this. Nothing new was added. Nothing dramatic occurred. Life simply softened. And in that softening, meaning settled naturally. The Egyptians did not seek hidden knowledge. They practiced hidden continuity. What endured was not secrecy, but repetition. These quiet practices also influenced how people aged. The elderly were not excluded from ritual life. They were central to it. Their repetition stabilized the household. Children learned by observing. No instruction was necessary. Night taught through example. This transmission was subtle. It did not rely on explanation. It relied on rhythm. As long as the rhythm continued, order remained intact. This is why these practices survived for centuries with little change. They were not innovations. They were continuities. Night after night, the same gestures repeated. The world did not demand novelty. It demanded care. Hidden rituals did not aim to alter reality. They aimed to maintain it. This maintenance required humility. The Egyptians did not attempt to control unseen forces aggressively. They aligned with them quietly. This approach prevented fear. If the unseen was approached gently, it responded gently. Night practices reflected this belief. Nothing was forced. Nothing was challenged. The individual rested within order rather than against it. And because of this, sleep remained deep. Dreams remained clear. Waking remained unhurried. Hidden rituals did not create separation between sacred and ordinary life. They dissolved it. Everything belonged to the same structure. Day and night, waking and sleeping, living and dying. Quiet practices supported this unity. They reminded individuals that meaning did not require attention. It required presence, and presence at night was best maintained through silence. Even now, after centuries of study, excavation, translation, and reconstruction, Egypt still feels different at night. Not unknown, not frightening, but unresolved. This feeling does not come from what we do not know. It comes from what Egypt refuses to explain. Most ancient civilizations speak to us through answers, through records, through declarations of power, belief, or law. Egypt speaks through restraint, especially at night. When the light fades over the Nile, when the land returns to shadow, Egypt does not disappear. It quiets. And in that quiet, something remains present. This is why Egypt still feels mysterious, not because it hides information, but because it never insisted on revealing everything. The Egyptians were not obsessed with clarity. They were concerned with balance. What needed to be known was known. What did not need articulation was left undisturbed. Modern observers often mistake this for secrecy. But it was not secrecy. It was proportion. Knowledge was not meant to overwhelm experience. This approach becomes most visible at night. In darkness, Egypt does not compete for attention. It does not dramatize itself. It settles. This settling is unfamiliar to us. Modern life rarely allows things to remain unfinished, unexplained, unresolved. We expect answers. Egypt does not provide them on demand. Instead, it offers presence. At night, this presence becomes more apparent. The monuments do not assert meaning. They absorb silence. The temples do not instruct. They endure. The landscape does not narrate. It listens. This creates unease for the modern mind. We are trained to extract meaning quickly, to label, to summarize. Egypt resists this. Its mystery is not a puzzle to solve, but a state to enter. This is why even those familiar with Egyptian history often describe a sense of quiet awe at night. The feeling is not intellectual, it is temporal. Night reveals something Egypt preserved carefully, a relationship with time that does not hurry. During the day, Egypt appears monumental, structured, measured. At night, those measurements soften. Distances feel longer. Sounds travel differently. The rhythm slows. This is not illusion. It is design. Egypt was built to exist across time, not within moments. Night returns the land to this longer rhythm. And when modern observers encounter it, they sense the difference instinctively. We live by segmented time, hours, deadlines, schedules. Egypt lived by continuity. At night, that continuity becomes perceptible. Nothing signals urgency. Nothing demands completion. The night does not push forward. It holds. This holding is unfamiliar. It is also deeply calming. But calm can feel strange when one is accustomed to stimulation. The mystery of Egypt at night is not about hidden chambers or lost knowledge. It is about an intact relationship with stillness. The Egyptians never treated night as a problem to solve. They treated it as a condition to inhabit. This is why their culture remains legible in darkness. So many civilizations become silent ruins when the sun sets. Egypt becomes itself. The night reveals how deeply Egyptian life was aligned with natural withdrawal. The sun's absence was not interpreted as loss. It was expected. The world was not diminished by darkness. It was balanced. Modern societies resist darkness. We light it. We fill it. We extend the day artificially. Egypt did not. Darkness was allowed to perform its function. This function was not concealment. It was restoration. The body rested. The land cooled. Attention released. Meaning did not need reinforcement. This approach shaped everything. Architecture that holds shadow, rituals that slow movement, beliefs that allow uncertainty. The result is a civilization that does not exhaust itself through explanation. Even today, when scholars can describe how temples were built, how rituals were performed, how texts were written, the feeling remains. Something is not concluded, and that is precisely the point. Egypt did not seek conclusion. It sought continuation. Night is where continuation becomes visible. In modern life, night often feels like an interruption, a pause between productive periods. For Egypt, night was not an interruption. It was an integral phase. Life did not stop at sunset. It changed register. This change is what modern observers feel but struggle to name. We are unused to shifting registers without explanation. Egypt did so effortlessly. The mystery we perceive is the absence of insistence. Egypt does not insist on interpretation. It allows experience. This allowance creates space. Space invites projection. Projection becomes mystery. But the mystery is not Egypt's doing. It is ours. We bring urgency into a place that never required it. At night, this mismatch becomes obvious. The land does not respond to our questions. It responds to patience. Those who remain still long enough sense it. The quiet does not open like a door. It settles like dust. Nothing dramatic occurs. And yet, something changes. This is why Egypt remains compelling. It does not compete with modern speed. It exists beside it. At night, when modern distractions recede, Egypt's rhythm becomes audible. The modern mind, deprived of stimulation, encounters a different tempo. This tempo does not explain itself. It invites adaptation. This adaptation is uncomfortable at first. Then it becomes grounding. Many visitors report the same sensation, a slowing that feels involuntary, as if the land itself sets pace. This is not mysticism, it is environment. Egypt was designed to be lived slowly, not inefficiently, intentionally. Time was not something to conquer, it was something to align with. Night reinforced this alignment. Modern life has lost this rhythm. We compress time. We fragment attention. Night becomes a zone to manage rather than inhabit. Sleep becomes a task. Rest becomes conditional. Egypt offers a different model. At night, nothing is optimized. Nothing is improved. Nothing is accelerated. The world simply continues at a reduced tempo. This reduction is not loss. It is preservation. This is what feels mysterious. A civilization that did not fear slowness, that did not equate silence with absence, that did not treat darkness as danger. Egypt trusted the night, and that trust remains palpable, even now, even through ruins, even through centuries. The mystery of Egypt at night is not a question waiting for an answer. It is a state waiting for permission. Permission to slow. Permission to not resolve. Permission to listen rather than interpret. This permission is rare, which is why it feels profound, and why, long after its builders are gone, Egypt still feels awake at night, not active, not watchful, but present. And now, nothing needs to be concluded. There is no lesson to extract, no final meaning to carry forward. What you have heard was not meant to be remembered precisely. It was meant to pass through you. Ancient Egypt did not ask to be understood completely. It asked to be approached with patience. At night, the Egyptians did not seek answers. They allowed things to remain unfinished. They trusted that not everything required resolution. This trust shaped their world. Their monuments remain because they were never rushed. Their rituals endure because they were never forced. Their silence lasts because it was never filled unnecessarily. As this night continues, there is no need to hold on to details. Names can fade, dates can soften, images can dissolve. What remains is rhythm. A slower breath, a longer pause, a sense that time does not need supervision. Egypt did not explain the night, it lived inside it. And in doing so, it left behind something rare, a way of existing without urgency. You do not need to imagine the past vividly. You do not need to picture temples or deserts clearly. Let them remain indistinct. The Egyptians understood that clarity is not always restful. Sometimes it is the blurred edge of things that allows the mind to settle. If sleep arrives, let it come without ceremony. If it does not, let the stillness remain. Nothing here needs completion. The night is not an ending. It is a continuation, quieter, slower, unmeasured. As it was along the Nile, so it can be now. Some civilizations tried to explain the world. Others learned to listen to it. Tonight, there is nothing to do. The night continues, and you are allowed to rest within it.